welcome to Church and State with Chris Farrar and Brian McCall. In the 2 weeks since last we've been together, Habemus Papam, we have a new pope. So let's just start off. Get your reactions to the conclave. What happened? What do you think? What do you think it means for the church?
Well, anything short of the unthinkable would be a vast improvement over the pontificate we've just suffered through. It was a surprising outcome because I had never heard of Prevost before, but it was clear that he was always considered to be the backup candidate to Parolin. Parolin did not get the votes.
Yep.
And the conservatives realized it was going to be some kind of progressive, some level of liberalism, so the conservatives must have gotten behind Prevost pretty quickly to mitigate harm. Because it doesn't seem like he's anything even remotely as threatening to the good order of the church as Bergoglio was. He's a pretty serious guy. Sure, he's making noises about the pathways forged by Vatican II, but there's a lot of encouraging information about him, so I'm willing to withhold judgment. For example, there are reliable reports that he has regularly celebrated the traditional Mass. He sang the Regina Coeli. He did the Angelus in Latin. He wore the traditional vestments, including the Mozzetta. He's back in the papal apartments. He got out of the ridiculous hotel. So a lot of signs indicate that he's willing to, at least to some extent, to subordinate his personality and his personal opinions to the office. But it's too soon to tell. I think we'll know in about a month what the overall drift will be. Will it be a little bit toward the right, a little bit further toward the left? It's unfortunate we have to speak in these political terms in the church, but since the politicization of the church at Vatican II, that's what we have. So a little bit to the right, a little bit to the left. His brother says he'll be right down the middle, and his brother is a Trumpster. So,
Well, he is a registered Republican. We do know that. Now, again, some of these people I've kind of gotten sour when these things have been pointed out. He dressed like a pope in his first appearance. He brought out the crozier that Benedict had used at his first Mass on Friday.
Which was Pius IX's ferule.
Which was Pius IX. Now, he did bring back John Paul II on Sunday. But
he did?
He did, yeah. Sunday Mass, he was carrying that. But, and again, his first Mass in the Sistine, it was a Novus Ordo, obviously, but it was more dignified than Francis's. He actually genuflected to the Blessed Sacrament, which Francis never did. And again, a lot of people are criticizing. People are pointing this out, saying, "Oh, these are just externals. But the thing about the Catholic Church is externals are important.
Exactly.
They are. And is he Pius X, who's going to restore the traditional Latin Mass, consecrate Russia to the Immaculate Heart tomorrow? Probably not. But are we better off having Tagle, the crazy gambler, or Supich or someone like that? Obviously, not better off. So
no, in fact, I think a lot of the liberal cardinals realize what a train wreck the last pontificate was.
Right.
And as I said during the last episode, their thinking must have been, we can go with the so-called moderate because we're going to do whatever we want to do anyway in our dioceses. And meanwhile, we don't want a pope who's going to put the whole church out of business, which Francis seemed determined to do. So they got the best of both worlds. A moderate pope who can keep things together while they just do their thing, their liberal thing in their various dioceses. And the conservatives made do with what they had. Considering the electorate he had put together in the conclave, I think we dodged a bullet. But, no final judgments yet. Let's wait a month.
Sure.
I think it'll take about a month to see clearly which direction this pontificate will go. The key thing will be, what will he do about the traditional liturgy? Because if he lets that flourish, almost everything else would take care of itself. The young people are flocking to the traditional Mass, and with that comes a traditional understanding of the doctrines of the faith on moral issues. And these young people who go to the traditional Mass are going to have large families. The old fogies of the Novus Ordo are dying out, along with the octogenarians and septuagenarians that still attend the Novus Ordo Mass. And we'll see. And the church might just heal itself over time, or there could be catastrophic development in the next 6 months. We just don't know.
No, it's interesting. The message that I clearly heard over a few days. So from the balcony, his main message was peace.
Right.
To the Cardinals, he talked about building bridges. We need to build a bridge. Again, what I read in that is that the Cardinals, even if they were liberal, were tired after the Francis significant.
Absolutely.
Too much fighting, too much controversy. And he's saying, I'm going to ratchet it down. I'm going to calm things down. My prediction on the traditional Latin Mass, I think the first sign we will see is what happens with Cardinal Roche. Cardinal Roche, 5-year appointment is up this year, 2025. He's nearing 75. And if he does not reappoint him, if he says, thank you for your service, appoint someone else, who that is, to the congregation for the divine worship, that will be telling. Now, my prediction, he will not issue it. I know there's some people floating around the internet claiming he's going to revoke Traditionis Custodes in a few days. I highly doubt that. I think what's more likely is he'll say, thank you, Pope Francis, for this lovely document that we're now going to ignore.
Yeah, and I think he'll ignore it.
He'll appoint somebody to replace Roche, who will basically call around the diocese saying, forget about all the pressure we put on you. It's up to you. It's your diocese. You can decide what Latin Masses to allow and take that pressure off.
Yeah, I think the sermon that Cardinal Erdo gave just before the conclave stressed this idea of the local episcopacy, the territorial jurisdiction of each bishop, being of decisive importance in the church. So Francis talked a lot of talk about that, but he was a dictator.
Yeah.
Whereas now, if the bishops regain control of their own dioceses, and more important, or just as important, if they regain control of their dioceses in the face of these ridiculous bishops' conferences that Paul VI institutionalized after Vatican II, then we'll see a lot more potential for a restoration in those dioceses where the bishop wants to buck the trend of his liberal confreres.
Yeah.
And then maybe Strickland will get reinstated somewhere, too.
Maybe. Now, Prevost was involved with Strickland's removal, but it's hard to know who was really behind that. I mean, was he just doing, executing Francis's orders, or it's hard to know. So I think we have to be careful about that, even though...
Yeah, we don't know. But let's tick off some of the positives in terms of externals, just from the choice of name.
Yes.
So he's basically adverting to Leo XIII. He says his main reason was the social teaching of Leo, which of course is quite solid.
Yes.
And we are obliged to heed it. But there are other things about Pope Leo. The St. Michael prayer, the vision he had, which prompted the St. Michael prayer. I'm sure Prevost is aware of that. The encyclicals Libertas and Immortali Dei, which reaffirmed resoundingly that the Catholic confessional state is the proper constitution of the Christian Commonwealth, even if we can't see it realized today. But he did say in Immortali Dei that we have an obligation to use cankered liberties, as he called them, the modern liberties, without violating our conscience, to the extent that we can, to bring all of society back to the form and pattern of Christianity. So he was an anti-modern pope. Now, the liberal narrative tries to portray him as part of a homogeneous development of acceptance of the modern status quo, the conquering march of the zeitgeist, as I call it. But he wasn't part of a homogeneous development. He just basically said we have a practical problem here. The revolutions have happened, and we have to live within this framework, but we have to endeavor to bring it back to the proper constitution of the state. And of course, the liberal narrative forgets Pius X. They omit him from the homogeneous development, the most anti-modernist pope of all. Pius XI, who condemned social modernism, meaning the rejection of the teaching of Leo on the Christian Commonwealth.
Right.
And of course, Pius XII and Humani Generis, who followed up on Pius X with a whole new, basically a syllabus of errors of the modernists, including their questioning of the veracity of sacred scripture, and very subtly the errors he identified: sentimentalism and false irenicism. Making Google eyes at the modern world and saying to the modern world, "Oh, we're just here to help you." Or as we read in Gaudium et Spes, "Do not fear the church." This groveling, or as Jacques Maritain put it, too little, too late, kneeling before the world.
Yes.
So there is no homogeneous development. And then we'll see what this Pope does. It seems to me that there's a streak of militancy in him. If you read the whole of his first homily, the Italian part as well as the English part, he's talking about the church as the glorious ark of salvation.
Mhm.
talking about how the Christian faith is belittled as absurd in many quarters and not worthy of belief. And so it seems to me that he's going to be doctrinally pretty sound. I don't think we're going to see any kind of drive to legitimize the LGBTQ XYZ community.
Yeah.
But again, I repeat myself, we have to wait. And I think in about a month, we'll have a pretty clear idea where we're going.
We do. We do. And again, I'm like you. Names, these things are important to Catholics, dates. So he chooses the name of Pope Leo the 13th, who gives us the St. Michael's prayer. And he is elected on the feast of St. Michael in the snow, May 8th. Again, with God, there are no mere coincidences. I think that's interesting. He invokes Our Lady of Pompeii, who also May 8th is a very important day for her image under that title. Again, I think these things. He's a very educated man. He speaks many languages, but at his heart, and this is what amazed me. I mean, he is American. He has
Yeah.
lived a long time in Latin America, but he was raised in Chicago. He is American, and I think what we shouldn't discount is that makes him. It's going to make him very practical, right? Americans, can be one of our faults that we're too practical, but we are sort of a very practical people. Like, let's get things done. Let's
Yep,
not
yep.
wreck things, where we've been through a pontificate of wrecking things, a wrecking ball. And, I think we're likely, even with the traditional Latin Mass, again, even if he doesn't love it, even if he's not a, Cardinal Burke who loves a Capomania, um, I think practically he's going to say, why are we bothering these people? They're not hurting anyone. They're devout. They love the church, and they produce vocation. Something he said to the cardinals, they're all worried about, that there's no vocation. So again, a practical American. We've seen this in a lot of American bishops. Again, those are not ideological. They may not learn the traditional mass themselves, but you know what? You're good for business. We're happy to have you here. Go do your thing. And I think
The
that
miner and the crook.
yep, exactly. Exactly.
So yeah, I think there's reason for optimism, and we have to stress, we so-called traditionalists, we don't have an axe to grind. We're not looking to denigrate a pope or to say that he's part of the plot to overthrow the church. We want to have hope about the election of a pope. There's even video of me and Father Gruner in a TV studio about 7 or 8 miles outside of Rome on the day that Francis was elected, saying positive things about him because we didn't know enough about him. But we wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt. We're not about, criticizing popes for the sake of criticizing popes. You don't get our kicks out of doing that.
Right.
We want a solid pope. We want to see something like a revival, or at least something more realistic, a pope who doesn't get in the way of a revival. We may have that with this pope.
Yes, exactly. I mean, we might. Again, I agree. Cautious optimism, and given the benefit of the doubt, that's what we really need to do, and see what comes from it. I mean, again, I do think his approach is going to be to selectively choose from what Francis did, and highlight what can be said. And just for example, in his first speech to the Curia, he says Francis masterfully and concretely set out in the Apostolic Exhortation Evangelium Gaudium. When I heard that, when I was listening to it, I paused and thought, oh no, bad. But he says, from which I would like to highlight several fundamental points. The return to the primacy of Christ in proclamation, the missionary conversion of the entire Christian community, growth in collegiality and synodality, attention to the sensus fidei, especially in its most authentic and inclusive forms, such as popular piety. Now, again, we'll put aside the synodality mention for a second, but there's a lot in that gave us heartburn, that we wrote about, a lot of nasty things said about people, but no one can take fault with the centrality of proclaiming Christ, the missionary conversion, right, of the entire world. These are all good things. So if you're going to pluck a few phrases out of Francis, he seemed to very carefully have picked those. Now, why do you mention collegiality and synodality? If you listen to what was being said in the congregations, what I think the conservatives were trying to do, they're trying to use Vatican II against themselves. They essentially want to get rid of this synodality thing that Francis started. And their arguments in the congregation were, Well, all synodality really is collegiality, understood in terms of Vatican II. They want to swap the concepts. Now, we have problems with collegiality in Vatican II.
Whatever that means.
Whatever that means. But whatever it means, it's far better than what Francis was building. So again, the way he does that, I think I read that as a message, and it talks about what Erdo said, getting authority back to the bishops, that's how he's going to try to keep the word synodality, but shift its meaning.
Yeah, now the problem with collegiality is it doesn't make a lot of sense. If you read Lumen Gentium,
no,
it talks about how the body of bishops exercises supreme power when it works and when it acts together with the Pope, but never without the Pope. But then the Pope exercises supreme power without the bishops. So what do you have? Two supreme powers? One supreme power, meaning the Pope, and another supreme power, the Pope with the bishops. I mean, it's odious, to use a fancy word. It doesn't really mean anything. It's just another way of saying the Pope has supreme power in the church, and if he chooses, he can exercise that together with the bishops.
Right.
But there's only one head, the earthly head of the church, which is the Pope. So we'll see what this Pope thinks of collegiality. One thing's for sure, though. It won't be the case, as we just found out with Francis recently, that he'll be taking medication for mood stabilization, as we just learned about Francis today.
Yeah.
Because apparently he was either a manic depressive or some other kind of mental disorder that caused him to have these incredible outbursts of rage. And now we're hearing from Marco Tozzati that he can reveal, since Francis has passed on, from sources that are impeccable, that he was on these meds to control his emotions.
Sure.
And he had a reputation for being basically, I hate to say this, a nut when he was a younger Jesuit. That's why they sent him to Germany to attempt a doctorate that he was unable to complete.
No, really, from the very first moments, this new Pope has just sort of exuded calm and stability. Yeah. I mean, that clearly seems to be what his demeanor is. Well, talking about instability and being a nut, let's talk about the Democrats, because they've really seemed to have gone off the deep end of the deep end of the deep end where they were. I mean, it's ironic. It's almost like Pope Francis, we used to talk about, essentially accused everybody else of what he did himself, right? And Evangelion Gaudium is an example. Well, the Democrats have been accusing Donald Trump and the Republicans of violating the separation of powers and of causing an insurrection for years now. And now they just basically seem to be doing that themselves. We have judges who are basically destroyed the separation of powers and taken over the government. And now a group of Democrats, including Democrat mayor and congressman from New Jersey, essentially broke into an ICE facility in New Jersey to try to break out illegal aliens. The mayor got arrested, and the DOJ says they're going to prosecute the Democrat congressman. But so they had an insurrection.
Well, yeah, their insurrections are righteous. So the problem with the Democrats is, and this has been said by commentators all over the map, that they have no agenda. Their one motivation, the one plank of the Democrat Party now is, we hate Trump. And we must oppose whatever Trump is for. No matter how commonsensical his proposals are, they must be opposed. Right. So we oppose the closing of the border, and we oppose sending vicious criminals out of the country under standing deportation orders. And we oppose tariffs that give us a level playing field, even though the Democrats were demanding tariffs 20 years ago. So, they've lost their minds, and their hatred of Trump is the mainspring of the entire Democrat Party now. But why is that? Well, it isn't just because they hate the man, which, of course, they do. They hate what he represents. He's coming into the middle of this corrupt establishment, and he's trying to dismantle it, which will end the funnel of money into the pockets of all of these corrupt politicians. He is trying to derail the gravy train. They see it coming, and they want it stopped. So that's the explanation for what these judges are doing. Trump's trying to dismantle the corrupt federal bureaucracy, and these judges are trying to preserve it by interfering with core exercise of executive authority. They want to be the employment agency, these judges, for the federal government. They want to be the union grievance arbitration board instead of the appropriate civil service appellate route, which is an administrative function within the executive branch. They want to take over immigration policy, even though Congress has stripped the Article 3 courts of jurisdiction over immigration matters, including immigration appeals. If you want to appeal your deportation, you do it through the Bureau of Immigration Appeals, not a federal judge in San Francisco. So there's been a total usurpation of core executive functions by these federal judges. And the most egregious example I can think of right now is the temporary protected status of the 500,000 refugees, so-called, that Biden let into the country.
Right.
And a federal judge has declared that although they were let in en masse with no vetting and no due process for each of them, you can't get rid of them unless you give each of them a trial one by one, 500,000 trials. And that the temporary protected status granted by Biden can't be undone by Trump. Absolutely ridiculous.
Wow.
And that's before the Supreme Court right now. I think John Sauer wrote the brief. And John Sauer has basically said that the judiciary has totally usurped executive functioning in the area of immigration law, and the Supreme Court has to stop it.
Well, interestingly, just before we started recording this today, Milwaukee County Circuit Judge Hannah Dugan was indicted by a federal grand jury for helping an illegal immigrant to evade Immigration and Customs Enforcement last month. So, I mean, you have a judge helping somebody to break the law.
Yeah, a criminal, helping a criminal to evade arrest.
Right.
By the lawful authorities. Now, why would this judge do this? It's not rational. It's driven by one thing and one thing only. She hates Donald Trump. Donald Trump is in favor of deporting criminals. Therefore, she must stop the deportation of criminals. Now, Obama deported something like 2.5 to 3 million people. Nobody cared in the Democrat Party that he was conducting this incredibly massive deportation operation. But now that Trump is doing it, deportation is bad, even if it's deportation of a gangbanger, a murderer, a child rapist. And it must be stopped for one reason and one reason only. We hate Trump.
Yes.
That's the level on which these imbeciles are operating right now.
I mean, it's almost like Trump ought to go around proposing everything he's against, and then they'll do what he wants.
Yeah. And he's succeeding now. The tariffs are working.
Yep.
There was no recession. Inflation has cooled down dramatically. Prices are dropping. Gas is back almost to the level it was.
I saw gas at like $2.30 where we are the other day.
Yeah, it's back to where it was under Trump. Yeah. And he's only just getting started. He hasn't been in office even 4 months yet.
Yeah. No, he struck a trade deal with the UK. China capitulated essentially in Geneva this week and are going to drop their tariffs and do a deal. And again, look at his first test, right? He has always said the Ukraine war wouldn't have gotten out of control if he had been here. Pakistan and India got into a conflict, and he's already got them in a ceasefire days later. So
the Democrats are so deranged that his every success only increases their madness.
Yes.
Because this guy comes in, I'm a businessman. Don't give me any of this razzmatazz about your corrupt bureaucracies. I'm going to do things my way, and I'm going to show you up to be the incompetents, the liars, and the corrupt, self-serving parasites that you are.
Right.
And he does a few simple things that a businessman does. He picks up the phone and makes deals.
Right.
He makes deals over here, makes deals over there, makes deals everywhere. Just by picking up the telephone, it's driving them insane because he's showing what can actually be done with an effective leader. That's why. That's another reason that they hate him. They don't just hate him because of his personality. They hate him because he's succeeding.
Right. Well, he called it at his address to Congress. He said, "There's nothing I can do or say that will make you clap or make you happy." he said it to their face.
Well, this just shows that we're dealing with basically a cult of radical liberals who have never reached maturity as adults. I refer to this problem of psychosexual infantilism. They never really became solid, integrated personalities, most of these screaming memes. And so you see basically deranged people who are now in control of the Democrat Party. I have a friend who thinks that they're going to find a moderate Democrat somewhere to run in the next election. And I basically said, we don't need a moderate Democrat. We just need to get rid of the Democrats. They're worse than useless.
Yeah.
Just step aside, because they've basically taken themselves out of contention as a serious political force in this country. They're just lunatics. The party's in control. The Democrat Party's in control of lunatics now, and I don't see any way out of that dilemma for them. When you consider that their thought leaders right now are Bernie Sanders and AOC.
And what's her name? Crockett.
A socialist and a dimwit bartender.
Right.
These are the great, and Crockett, by the way.
Yeah, Crockett,
who actually speaks like a normal human being, but has somehow decided that she has to affect ghetto patois and talk like a moron in order to be a successful politician. It's total put on. So we're dealing with a bunch of performative fakers pretending that they are the ones that have the solutions for the American people, when all they are is just an obstacle to progress and restoration in this country. That's all they are. Their function right now is to serve as an obstacle to whatever Trump wants to do. They have nothing else to offer but an impediment.
So it's interesting, as we often say, there's interesting parallels between church and state. So what do we see? We obviously see two imperfect men who are clearly not, don't have everything right, have had a checkered past, perhaps in some areas, Pope Leo and Donald Trump, but who seem to be bringing sanity back to church and state, bringing, a pulling back from what came before each of them, which was dark. And it's kind of interesting that there seems to be a turning point in the same year, right? That Donald Trump is inaugurated, a new pope comes in, and it seems to be giving some hope in both spheres. As goes the church, may go the world.
Yeah, we've made this point before that Jorge Bergoglio was the Joe Biden of the Catholic Church.
Yes.
He wrecked everything.
Yep.
So we can only hope that he reaches eternal felicity. We shouldn't wish anything other than that for him. We should pray for him. But as a pope, obviously he was a complete disaster. And everyone in Rome knew it. Even the people in the conclave, even the liberals in the conclave knew that he was a disaster and that something had to be done. Because, as I said, they don't want to put themselves out of business.
Yes, exactly. Some of the nutty liberals, I think, don't care if they're out of business. But
some of them, right.
Yeah, most of them don't want to go out of business. So there you have it. Well, there you have. We're mildly optimistic, and we'll see in the next couple of weeks. We may have some signs, of things that continuing to improve in the United States, but in the church as well. So we'll see you in a couple of weeks and give you our reaction to those developments. Yeah,
when you have a few more points on the trajectory, you can draw the arc.
That's it.
And we should know that in about 2 to 3 weeks, maybe a month.
All right, we'll see you soon.
Until next time.